The phone rang at 6:30 in the morning. My son's voice sounded very cold and planned out. He told me that Mom had passed away during the night. He said she died peacefully, Dad. Then he told me that she had left everything to him. He claimed he inherited the house, the bank accounts, and all her property. He told me that I was not included in her will. However, this did not make sense to me. My wife had been suffering from dementia. Most of the time, she could not even remember what my name was. I wondered how she could have suddenly changed her legal will in that condition. Because of this, I did not just sit and mourn quietly like Brandon thought I would. Instead, I began to look for answers. What I found over the next 2 days would reveal a plan that was very calculated and mean. It was a scheme that would end my son's freedom forever. It would also show a truth that would surprise 200 people at a funeral for a woman who was actually still alive. The call happened at 6:30 on a Monday morning in November. Outside, the Seattle rain was hitting my kitchen window. I was standing there with my second cup of coffee. I was watching the morning light move across Lake Washington. I am 70 years old and have been retired for 5 years. My career kept me out at sea for many months at a time, but now I was finally at home and present. My phone lit up with a call from Brandon. He is my 40-year-old son. He works as a real estate agent and is better at selling big dreams than actually living a good life. We had not talked in 2 weeks. Our last conversation ended because I asked him about some bruises on his mother's wrist. I had seen them during my last visit to Cedarwood Manor. He had just ignored my question. I picked up the phone and said, "Brandon, it's Dad." His voice sounded fake and overly serious. He told me he had bad news. He said Mom died last night peacefully while she was sleeping. When he said that, my mug almost slipped out of my hand, but I caught it. Carolyn was my wife for 45 years. She was the one who raised our kids while I was away at sea, and now she was gone. I asked him how it happened because I was planning to go see her that day. He told me the funeral would be this weekend and that he had already made all the plans. Then his voice became very cold. He talked about Mom's estate and said the will was very clear. He told me everything goes to him. He listed the house, the cottage, her investments, and everything else. He told me I get nothing and warned me not to fight him on it. Then the call ended. I just looked at the phone while the rain fell harder. My Carolyn was dead. Brandon's first thought was not about being sad or helping me. His main goal was making sure I knew I was cut out of the money. He didn't say he was sorry. He gave me a threat. I knew something was wrong. I thought about 3 days before. I remembered Carolyn sitting by the window at Cedarwood Manor. That is the nursing home where Brandon moved her 10 months ago. She used to be a woman who loved her garden and was very smart her whole life. Now, she was reduced to just staring at nothing. When I took her hand and said her name, she did not know who I was. Dr. Grant told me she had severe dementia. Dr. Grant was Brandon's old friend from college, and he was her main doctor. He said the disease can move very fast at her age. But dying suddenly overnight without a call from the home seemed strange. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. With my hands shaking, I called Cedarwood Manor. A person answered and asked how they could help. I told them I was calling about my wife, Carolyn Hayes. I said I heard she died last night. There was a pause. The person said they had no record of that and went to check her room. I heard footsteps and a door opening. Then they told me, "Mr. Hayes, your wife is fine." They said she was eating breakfast right now and asked if I was confused. I sat down and said no, then thanked them. I hung up the phone and looked at the rain. Brandon had told a lie. He told me his mother was dead so he could take her estate. He threatened me while Carolyn was actually alive and eating her breakfast. If he lied about her death, I wondered what else he was lying about. I opened my computer and searched for a lawyer in Seattle who helps elderly people. The first name I saw was Marshall Foster. He was an expert in elder law. I called his office and said I needed to talk to Mr. Foster right away. I told them I thought my son was trying to steal my wife's property while she was still alive. They gave me an appointment for that afternoon. I put the phone down and looked at the rain with my cold coffee. For 40 years, I moved big ships through storms in the ocean, but I had never seen a storm like this one. My own son was betraying his mother. He was planning something terrible. That afternoon, I was going to start fighting back. That afternoon, I went to Marshall Foster's office. It felt like a safe place away from the rain and the streets and the trouble in my life. The office was on the 18th floor downtown. It had big windows looking at the bay, and rain was on the glass. Marshall sat behind a big desk. He was in his mid-50s with gray hair and looked like a lawyer you could trust when things are falling apart. He told me to start from the beginning. I told him everything about the call from Brandon at 6:30. I told him about the fake sadness and the lie that Carolyn had died. I told him about the threat regarding the will and then my call to the nursing home. I told him the truth that my wife was actually alive. Marshall put his pen down and said this was very serious. He said if my son has power of attorney and is lying about her health or stealing her money, it is fraud and elder abuse. He said we needed real proof. He called a man named Julian Cross, who was a great financial investigator in Seattle. Julian arrived 20 minutes later. He was thin and looked very smart, wearing a wet jacket. He shook my hand and started working immediately. He asked how long Brandon had the power of attorney. I told him it had been 10 months, starting in January. It felt bad to say that. Before that time, Carolyn was very sharp. She worked at the library and played games like Scrabble. Then Brandon said she needed help and got the power of attorney. A few weeks after that, she was told she had severe dementia and was moved to the home. Brandon's friend, Dr. Grant, was the one who made the diagnosis. Julian told me to give him 48 hours to find out what was happening with the money. I felt guilty about being away at sea for so many years and missing birthdays. But Marshall told me that Brandon's choices were his own and that I didn't teach him to steal. After Julian left, I drove to the nursing home. The rain was lighter now. I found Carolyn in her usual chair by the window looking at the garden. I told her, "Hey, sweetheart, it's me," and got close to her. She gave no response. Her eyes looked far away. Her hair was gray and her hands felt very weak in mine. I talked to her anyway. I told her about the rain and the lawyer and how I would fix everything. She did not answer. A nurse named Sharon Palmer came in to check on her. I had seen her before and she seemed very kind. When she was done, she asked me to come into the hallway. She told me softly that my son was there yesterday and took Carolyn out for a drive. She said they were gone for 3 hours. My stomach felt tight hearing that. She said she didn't know where they went, but as a nurse for 20 years, she knows about dementia. She said when Carolyn came back, she didn't look confused. She looked scared. I asked if she said anything. The nurse said no, but her hands were shaking and she kept looking at the door like she was waiting for someone. I drove home in the heavy rain with those words in my head. Julian promised answers by Wednesday. I didn't know if I could wait. The city felt dark and scary. It felt like my life was being changed without me knowing. I wondered what Brandon did during those 3 hours and what he would do next. Tuesday felt like it would never end. I went to see Carolyn at noon and again at 5 o'clock. Both times, she was sitting in that same chair. She didn't recognize me when I held her hand. There was just a blank stare. The silence between us felt very heavy. Every visit felt like time was pushing down on me. On Wednesday morning, Julian called exactly at 8 o'clock. He told me I should sit down. I told him I was already sitting and to just tell me the news. He said my son had been taking money from Carolyn's accounts. He had taken $340,000 over the last 10 months. It wasn't one big theft. He was taking $30,000 to $40,000 every month. I felt like the room was spinning. That money was from Carolyn's 45 years of teaching and our retirement savings. It was disappearing piece by piece. Julian also said the cabin in the mountains was sold 4 months ago for $380,000, even though it was worth more. A shell company bought it, and Brandon likely controls that company. I couldn't even speak. My chest felt very tight. Julian had one more thing to tell me. He said Dr. Grant, the one who diagnosed Carolyn, went to college with Brandon. They have been friends for 20 years. The medical records showed she was being given very strong sedatives. He mentioned a condition called drug-induced dementia. He said it can be an accident, but sometimes it is done on purpose. I said it might be deliberate. After the call, I watched the rain, and then I looked up information about elder abuse. I read many stories of horror on my screen. The numbers made me feel sick. 1 in 10 seniors are abused, and 90% of the time, it is by family. Stealing money is the most common way, and it is the easiest to hide. I had spent 40 years at sea providing for them, but I wasn't there. I thought I was helping my family, but my absence cost Carolyn her safety. I tried to call Brandon 5 times that afternoon, but it went to voicemail every time. I felt a lot of dread. At 4:30, I went back to the nursing home. I saw Brandon's black car in the parking lot. I parked and waited while my heart was beating fast. 20 minutes later, Brandon came out holding Carolyn's arm. She was moving very slowly and her sweater was wet from the rain. He put her in the car and then got in while talking on his phone and laughing. They drove away, and I followed them from a distance. He drove to a small shopping center and sat there with the engine running for almost an hour. Carolyn did not move at all. Brandon was making many calls and taking notes. He was doing business while my wife sat there like she was frozen. When they went back to the home, I watched him take her inside. He did it in a mechanical way, like it was just a chore. Sharon, the nurse, told me, "I just missed my son." She said he had been gone for 2 hours, and it was the 3rd time that week. She said Carolyn always looks scared when she gets back and won't eat or talk. That night, the lawyer called and said he was trying to stop Brandon's power of attorney, but the courts are slow. Saturday was only 3 days away, and I felt like I was running out of time. Just after 8 o'clock, my phone rang from a number I didn't know. I almost didn't answer it, but I did. I said hello. There was silence, and then a very quiet voice said, "Vincent." I froze and asked who it was. Then the voice said, "Vincent, it's me. It's Carolyn." I felt shocked. I asked how she was calling and where she was. She said Sharon, the nurse, let her use her personal cell phone. Her voice sounded tired, but it was definitely her. She said she didn't have much time and told me to listen. I told her I didn't understand because she hadn't been able to speak. She said she knew what it looked like. She told me to come to her room tonight after 10 o'clock when things were quiet and Brandon was gone. She told me to make sure no one saw me. She said she would explain everything, but told me not to tell anyone about the call yet. Then she hung up. I looked at my phone and my hands were shaking. I checked the number, and it was the nurse's name. It seemed impossible. Carolyn hadn't been able to say 2 words for 10 months. I had held her hand while she stared at nothing. But I knew that voice was hers. It was the real Carolyn. I looked at my watch and saw it was 8:07. I had to wait 2 hours until 10 o'clock. I couldn't sit still. I walked around the house and my mind was racing. I wondered if she had been okay this whole time or if it was a trap. But I knew her voice. At 9:50, I got my keys and drove to the home through the rain. I waited in the parking lot until 10:15. The building was quiet and the lights were low. I used my code and went in through a side door. I walked down the dim hallway to her room. My heart was pounding. I wondered what I would see when I opened the door. I opened the door very slowly. The room was dark except for one small lamp. Carolyn was sitting up in bed waiting for me. I held my breath. Her eyes met mine, and they were clear and focused. She was not confused at all. For 10 months, I saw nothing but fog in her eyes, but now I saw her. I saw the smart and determined woman I loved. She told me to close the door. Her voice was strong and steady. She said we needed to talk and that I needed to listen carefully. I closed the door and sat in the chair where I had sat for many months. She told me she had been fine the whole time. She said she had been pretending to have dementia for 10 months during every single visit. She said she had to know which of her children would actually care for her when she had nothing left. She wanted to know who loved her because she was their mother, not because of her money. My throat felt tight when she said that. I asked if she was testing us. She said she tested both of us. Before she signed the papers for Brandon, she talked to a different lawyer. She moved most of her money into a trust that cannot be changed. She only left $340,000 in the accounts Brandon could see. She said that was enough to see what he would do. Her voice broke as she said he took every penny. He sold the cabin and started trying to take the rest. She said he had been giving her strong medicine, but she was hiding the pills under her tongue and spitting them out. I was shocked and said he was trying to kill her. She said yes, but she was also testing me. She said when she is really helpless one day, she needed to know I would still love her. She said I came 3 times a week and sat with her for hours. She said I held her hand even when she acted like she didn't know me. She told me I passed the test. I couldn't speak and just held her hand. She asked if I knew what it was like to get old and become invisible. She said Brandon and the doctor would talk about her money right in front of her like she was dead. She said her nightmare was being a burden and disposable. She asked who would protect her. I told her I would. She said the nurse Sharon had been helping her record Brandon's threats. Carolyn told me that every time Brandon forced her to sign papers, she was recording it. She had all the proof of what he was doing. She said we had to be very careful because Brandon thought she was dying and he was planning the funeral for Saturday. She said he wanted to show everyone how much he loved her while he stole everything. We sat in the dark room and made a plan. We were going to let him continue with his plan for the funeral. We were going to let him stand in front of everyone and tell his lies. Then, we would show everyone the truth. I stayed with her until nearly midnight. When I left, I felt a mix of anger at my son and a lot of love for my wife. The next 2 days were very hard. I had to act like I was grieving. I talked to Brandon on the phone, and he sounded like a perfect, sad son. He told me the funeral would be at the large chapel at 2 o'clock on Saturday. He said he invited 200 people. I met with Marshall and Julian on Friday. I told them Carolyn was alive and that she had been pretending. They were shocked. I showed them the recordings that Sharon had helped her get. Julian found out that the shell company that bought the cabin was indeed owned by Brandon. Marshall said we had enough evidence to go to the police, but I told him about our plan for the funeral. I wanted Brandon to be exposed in front of everyone he was trying to impress. Saturday morning was cold and gray. I went to the chapel early. There was a closed casket at the front, covered in flowers. It was empty, of course, or filled with something to make it heavy. Brandon arrived looking very sharp in an expensive suit. He came over to me and put his hand on my shoulder. He told me he was sorry for my loss. I looked him in the eye and didn't say anything. People started arriving. Friends, family, and people Brandon knew from work. There were about 200 people there at 2 o'clock. The service started. Brandon stood up to give a speech about his mother. He spoke for 20 minutes about how much he loved her and how much he would miss her. He talked about her kindness and her garden. He even squeezed out a few fake tears. He was giving the performance of his life. People in the audience were crying. He looked like the perfect son. Then he started talking about how he would honor her memory by taking care of her legacy. That was my cue. I stood up from the front row. The room went quiet. Brandon looked at me and told me to sit down, saying I was upset. I walked to the front and looked at the crowd. I told them that my son was a very good actor. I told them that the woman he was talking about was not in that box. Brandon started shouting that I had lost my mind. He told the ushers to take me out. Then the doors at the back of the chapel opened. A woman in a wheelchair was pushed in by Sharon the nurse. The room went completely silent. It was Carolyn. She was wearing a bright blue dress, and she looked healthy and strong. She stood up from the wheelchair and walked down the aisle. People started gasping, and some people screamed. Brandon turned white. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Carolyn walked right up to the front and took the microphone from him. She looked at the 200 people and said she was sorry for the confusion, but as they could see, she was very much alive. She looked at Brandon and told him that his plan had failed. She said she had seen and heard everything he did for the last 10 months. She told everyone how he stole her money and tried to drug her. 2 police officers walked into the chapel. Marshall had called them, and they were waiting outside. They walked up to Brandon and put him in handcuffs. He tried to argue, but the officers led him away in front of everyone. The crowd was in total shock. Carolyn turned back to the guests and thanked them for coming. She said she was going to use the money Brandon tried to steal to start a fund for elderly people who are being abused by their families. She said no one should ever be made to feel invisible or disposable, that we left the chapel together. The rain had stopped and the sun was coming out. We went back to our house, the one Brandon thought he had inherited. We sat in the garden that Carolyn loved. She told me she was sorry she had to put me through the test, but she had to be sure. I told her I understood. We spent the next year in court. Brandon was convicted of fraud and elder abuse. He was sent to prison. Dr. Grant lost his medical license and also went to jail. It was a long and painful process, but we were together. Carolyn's fund helped 63 other families find the truth about their loved ones. We learned that these stories are not just for entertainment. They are warnings and lessons. They are bought with pain and betrayal. Carolyn had to pretend to lose her mind to find the truth about her son. This story shows that we must always check on our elderly loved ones. Every story on New Channel carries real wisdom, because sometimes we learn best through stories. We should not let our lives become another statistic. If this story moved you, please think about your own family. Have you checked on your elderly loved ones lately? These stories are important and could save someone you love. Carolyn and I are now enjoying our retirement together, truly present and safe. If you want to hear more deep and meaningful life stories like this one, please make sure to subscribe to ZERIX Truth. Your support helps us bring more of these incredible journeys to light. Thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video.